Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaskar. You have stepped into a course that is going to change the way that you look at data. Not just how you analyze it, but also how you communicate it. My name is Nivid Desai. I serve as the Program Executive at Writing Studio IIT Gandhinagar. Welcome to Writing for Data Science. This course is at the intersection of analysis and communication. As all of us know, data analysis is not just about coding and models. It is about solving real-world problems. And that is exactly why every single thought that goes into solving those problems needs to be communicated. And not just to one audience, across multiple stakeholders. That is where this course comes in. This course prepares you with the foundations of writing, especially curated for data science. We will discuss audience analysis, critical thinking, logical reasoning, as well as storytelling that is native to data science. So join me on a journey at the intersection of numbers and narratives. I'll see you in class. Namaste, hello and welcome to Writing for Data Science. My name is Nivid Desai and we are on a journey to explore the interesting intersections between numbers and narratives. In today's lecture, we are going to look at some storytelling techniques that will help us enhance the narratives that we are building around the analysis of data that we have done. In particular, I want to emphasize 3 storytelling techniques that will help us connect with not only technical audiences, but also non-technical audiences. These 3 techniques are analogies, examples, and scenarios. Without further ado, let's jump right in to understand each one of these terms in some detail with examples. What are analogies? An analogy compares something unfamiliar, like data, to something familiar, making complex ideas easier to understand. This is more likely to be used when talking to a non-technical audience, because they may not understand the data in its abstract sense. They would much rather prefer associating it with a lived experience. Let's look at an example to understand this even better. Let's assume that the data says that India planted over 220 million trees in a single day in Uttar Pradesh. This data is from 2019. If you want to communicate this line with an enhanced impact to a non-technical audience in a storytelling manner, this is how an analogy will help you do that really well. Imagine if every person in Mumbai, Delhi, and Bengaluru planted 10 trees each on the same day. That is how massive this planting effort was. It is like turning rush hour crowds into a green army. And that is an analogy. If you look at the data, it is abstract. The number 220 million trees is too big to comprehend for a non-technical audience. But putting together the populations of Mumbai, Delhi, and Bengaluru and imagining planting 10 trees each on the same day is an imaginable scenario. It is something that grounds an abstract data into real-life knowledge. And that comparison, that connection, is what establishes clear understanding. It helps make the data concrete. Let's do a little exercise now that we have understood what an analogy is. Given this data that India loses about 50,000 crore rupees annually to food waste, it is a sad reality, but it is something that we will need to communicate with as much impact. So, create one analogy that helps a common person grasp the magnitude of this loss, just how much this loss costs, not in terms of money only, but also in terms of the volume of food being wasted. If you want to connect this with a common person, what kind of images, what kind of examples will you use to connect them with their real world understanding? Let's now turn to the second storytelling technique, examples. Examples act like illustrations in a story. They show how abstract ideas play out in the real world. It will also start ensuring that your data starts looking more credible. Because sometimes data sitting on the paper is not as effective as a real life example that you can communicate. Let's look at an example to understand this. The data says that India's Ujjwala Yojana distributed over 9 crore LPG connections by 2022. This is a data point. It is a report in terms of statistics. However, if you want to turn this into a lived reality, if you want to enhance the impact of this one data line, try to individualize it into one story. For example, Sunita, a vegetable vendor in Rajasthan, says that she no longer needs to collect firewood every morning. The LPG cylinder saves her 2 hours daily, the time that she now spends with her children. This right here is one single person's story. It's a narrative that helps the data come alive. So the data is not insufficient in and of itself, but it is communicated much better if you turn that into a person's story. And now you can reverse engineer it to 9 crore LPG connections. The same emotional impact that your audience will feel from one story will be multiplied 9 crore times. And that is the kind of impact that an example can make. Here's a quick exercise for you based on examples. Use this data set. Urban unemployment in India is the highest among graduates. This figure is from the Centre for Monitoring Indian Economy in 2023. Write a 2-line example story of a person who is facing this issue. You can go back to our lessons on creating a persona and then creating a narrative arc of that persona. That will help you understand how to turn examples themselves into stories. The third technique that I want to introduce to you is scenarios. Scenarios imagine a what if situation or project future outcomes using data. These are hypothetical. These are anticipatory in terms of what will happen if the data continues to follow this trend. For example, we all know that air quality in Delhi has reached severe levels, as in the AQI is more than 400 in winter months. This is a recurring problem. This is something that happens every year. We see the headlines in newspapers and TV channels. If you want to project this as a scenario to increase the kind of urgency of action, you can do this as an example. If this continues for 5 years, children growing up in Delhi might have lungs functioning like 60-year-olds. Imagine school kids being prescribed oxygen kits. This is a scenario. This is a projection towards the future. And this is a calculated scenario. It is not fear-mongering. It is not theorizing. This is a hypothetical scenario that is built on current trends. And that is what increases the urgency of action. That's a storytelling technique right there. If you want to persuade policymakers or local government to act, this kind of a scenario will help them understand the magnitude of impact right here, right now. Once again, like we have done exercises in both examples as well as analogies, let's do an exercise for scenario. Given this data that only 12% of plastic waste in India is effectively recycled, write a one-line future scenario showing why this matters, why this statistic needs to be dealt with at an alarming rate. Now that we have understood the focal points of these three techniques, analogies, examples, and scenarios, I also want to share with you some general storytelling techniques which will help you bridge your connection between a story and the intended audience. The first technique that I want to share with you is the so what principle. Many data points often lead to an obvious question. So what? Why should I care? And that why should I care is an extremely crucial question to answer. Because if you cannot justify it, your audience might lose interest. Your audience might stop paying attention to your communication. Therefore, always connect data to a takeaway or relevance so that the so what question is answered naturally. We have learned how to anticipate the questions in our readers and audience, and this so what, why should I care, is a question that continues to pervade in every single data communication. In a way, you have to prepare for it. In a way, you have to build your communication to answer the so what question inherently. So, for example, if the data suggests that literacy rate is 77.7% in India, the so what question can be answered with that means over 200 million people still can't read a newspaper or a medicine label. That is the magnitude of this statistic. That is how you can draw a cautionary story from a statistic that does not let out more context. If you build more context, it will turn into a cautionary tale. That is how you can answer the so what question. The second technique that I want to share with you is contrast and comparison. You can juxtapose the data to create perspective. For example, India spends less than 3% of GDP on health, half of what Brazil does. Now, the reader will be independent to check what Brazil does and what kind of impact it can have on their healthcare. The second example can be that in one city, 95% of children are vaccinated. In the next district, it is only 30%. This right here creates some kind of contrast and some kind of comparison so that the audience will be able to understand the disparity between data and the comparative nature of data. The third storytelling technique is to use a relatable hook. This is something that captures the audience's attention and holds it throughout your data communication. You might understand this as a relatively new technological term called clickbait, meaning an incendiary headline that in a way instigates you to click on it. However, in this case, a hook is not only there for shock value. It has two duties. Number one, it should attract attention, and number two, it should inspire curiosity. So you can start your story with a question or an image that your audience recognizes and becomes curious about. For example, have you ever had to skip a day's work because of a power cut? Imagine doing that every week. That is what rural India faces. This right here is a hook because it connects directly with the audience's daily lived experience. And then you flip on it to make sure they understand what rural India is going through. Here's a quick exercise before we conclude today's lecture. Come up with a one-liner hook for this data. 1 in 3 girls in India drops out before completing secondary school. What kind of a hook will you tell to a technical and a non-technical audience to attract their attention to your story? Make sure that it has to be grounded in their own experience, and then it has to lead to the data that you are supposed to communicate. That hook will not only be for shock value, it will attract their attention and it will inspire curiosity. So today's lecture by far has been filled with exercises and different kinds of storytelling techniques. We have seen examples, we have seen principles, and we have done a lot of exercises ourselves. So in the end, I would like to reiterate how to use the techniques that we have learned today to make sure that our stories leave the best impact possible. You can use analogies to simplify data. You can use examples to humanize statistics. And you can use scenarios to project consequences or possibilities. Support your narrative with storytelling principles, relevance, contrast, and hooks. Data may be technical, but storytelling is universal. No matter what the audience, technical or non-technical, they will respond well to storytelling if it is considerate and careful. So that was it from my side for this lecture. We looked at various storytelling techniques that can help us equip ourselves with the best kind of tools to tell the best kind of stories. I understand that all of this is still at a principled level. The practical implementation in the best possible way, I am bringing to you in the next lecture. Because in the next lecture, we are going to do a deep dive into pitching, one of my personally most favorite subjects, something that helps us solidify our understanding of storytelling into a functional medium of communication. Pitching coming right up in the next lecture. Until then, all the best, stay curious, keep learning. I'll see you in the next class. Thank you so much for joining me today. Namaskar.